Well, for more on the US election and the enormous money that swirls around it, let's speak with Professor Donald Green. He's a political scientist from Columbia University in the US, and one of his areas of expertise is the effect of money and fear-mongering on how people vote. Well, Professor Green is here as a guest of the US Studies Centre at Sydney Uni, and he joins us now in the studio. Professor Donald Green, thanks so much for your time this evening.
Pleased to be here.
In regard to the furor surrounding Todd Akin and what he had to say, no matter the damage to his own political career, his own political future, how damaging will Akin's comments be overall to the Republican campaign?
I think quite damaging. The Republicans are concerned that they're going to have a repeat of the meltdown they experienced in 2010, where they were in sight of capturing the Senate only to find that a series of scandals derailed them by switching the agenda from the issues of the economy right back to the old issues of kind of hypocrisy.
More than just an issue, I heard one Democrat congresswoman saying that this shows the Republicans' policies dealing with women and health are just off the mark. So it's more than an issue, it seems to be potentially alienating an entire and huge part of the electorate.
Well, the Republicans are trying desperately to get back to parity in terms of the gender gap. Women overwhelmingly prefer Obama and the Democrats, and they were running relatively even in terms of the gender gap in Missouri when the scandal broke.
On to campaigning. How much money will be spent, best guess, in the upcoming presidential campaign?
It's probably close to $2 billion.
$2 billion?
Something like that.
How does one spend that much money? What is the money spent on? What can be bought with that?
Well, it's funny because an almost unlimited amount of money can be spent, particularly given that it will be spent at an unprecedented rate in the mass media and on the ground game. Recall that the Electoral College in the United States makes roughly a third of the country up for grabs. So something like a third of the American population are going to experience, roughly 100 advertisements per day, perhaps 50 pieces of mail in their mailbox. It's going to be an unprecedented avalanche.
What will be the nature of those ads?
Well, most of them will be hard-hitting negative ads about the failings of the opposing candidate. Relatively little of it will be encouragements to vote, but some will focus on voting, because what's thought to be happening over the next few months is the creation of a massive get-out-the-vote campaign to bring out the party stalwarts in both parties.
I've read where there is voter disenchantment in the US, as there is in Australia, with what's seen as the negativity of politics and politicians towards each other. Given that, why would political parties use negativity as the arrowhead for trying to attract voters?
I think it's their determination to mobilize their base. In the last 3 elections, the United States has seen a kind of move in terms of strategy from persuasion, where you try to go for people who are persuadable in the middle, to mobilization, where you try to bring a bigger army of party stalwarts to the battlefield. And 2012 is expected to exacerbate that trend.
As I mentioned in the intro, you've done a lot of study into this area about campaigning and how people vote, the patterns of people voting. From your studies, what does work best in terms of both engaging voters and then, once you've engaged them, to actually win their vote?
Well, I think that authentic personal contact is what engages people. And so in recent years, there's been a surge of interest in door-to-door canvassing and calls from from volunteer phone banks, as opposed to commercial phone banks, as opposed to robocalls or direct mail. And so politics is, in some sense, in the United States, taken a step back 100 years to the days of precinct captains.
This in the era of social media, where everyone thinks we're becoming obsessed with messages given to us by our phones.
Well, social media is extremely important in terms of organizing, getting people to come to rallies, getting people to give money, but it's less important in terms of persuasion.
Now, we've seen the President talking about Mitt Romney's tax returns and calling for him basically to release more. Before I ask you about that, let's have a listen to something he just said earlier.
The American people have assumed that if you want to be President of the United States, that your life's an open book when it comes to things like your finances.
President Barack Obama talking there. How many ads will focus on finance in the forthcoming campaign, particularly the personal finances of this very wealthy man, Mitt Romney?
Well, I think it really all depends on whether the Romney side releases the tax returns and takes this off the political map. I expect that they will do that before the convention, then have their honeymoon period during the convention, and maybe it can be a bygone issue by the time they go into the final stretch of the campaign. So long as this kind of issue is out there for Democrats to poke at, it deflects attention from the issues that they most care about.
And how can that issue be entwined around the larger issue of the economy, what has been a sluggish economy and what many Americans are looking for? Who is going to protect my job? Who is going to put money back in my pocket and make sure it stays there?
I think that Americans are certainly prepared to believe that Republicans would be good at managing the economy. The concern that many Americans, however, fear is that Romney is not a person who's in touch with their personal problems. He made $20 million last year. He paid less than 15% in taxes. And so that makes him an easy target for Democrat-leaning independents who wonder whether he's got their best interests at heart.
Conversely, will the electorate, or a good deal of the electorate, say, well, this guy's made money, he understands money, he understands business, that's what we need at this moment?
Well, there's certainly a big segment of the American public that believes in the Republican agenda of lower taxes, less progressive tax system, more tax credits or incentives for small business. But I think that the problem is that when you're a wealthy person who's paying a relatively low tax rate before taxes have been lowered, people become suspicious of you.
The recent legal changes, the Supreme Court changes in regard to this whole issue of campaign financing. Can you tell us a little about that and what effect that is likely to have on the forthcoming election?
Well, the Supreme Court overturned a law that had been in effect since 1908. It was a fundamental law that prevented corporations from making direct donations to campaigns. It also opened the door to unlimited contributions to what are known as super PACs. And so 2012 is in some sense the year of the billionaire, the year when people who are rich beyond the wildest aspirations of the typical American are weighing in to have their political agenda get some airtime. And this is a new chapter, and both parties are in some sense unaccustomed to managing people who all of a sudden burst onto the stage out of nowhere and say, I'd really like to move around an embassy, or I'd really like to have a different law with respect to my pet agenda.
So how much does that mean in some respects when it comes to its elections, that the US could be, or at least be seen to be, moving away from the cornerstones of democracy towards a plutocracy?
Well, it remains to be seen whether the parties are simply going to use these people, let them have their day in the sun, accept their large contributions, and then basically redeploy the money for their own purposes, or whether the parties will actually be doing things legislatively or administratively to put their agendas into effect. That's, I think, the open question. In 4 years, will we see any stamp of these multi-millionaires?
From your vast experience and all you have studied, how do you think it could well reshape the political landscape and the people's trust in that landscape?
Well, I think it's probably easier to talk about trust. I think the trust will probably diminish as as parties are seen to be more in the pockets of the super rich. I think that in terms of policy outcomes, I'm a little bit more optimistic that relatively little will come out of it, in part because of the genius of American politics, which is gridlock. We have so many ways of preventing things from happening that even wealthy people find it difficult to transmute their wealth into political power.
The US doesn't have the monopoly on that, let me tell you.
Yeah.
In regard to patterns that you've studied, you know how people vote, you understand the patterns of people voting. Let me put you on the spot in a crystal ball question. How do you think people will vote in this upcoming presidential election? Who will be the next president of the United States?
I'm guessing that Obama will prevail. He's a superior campaigner to Romney. Romney will have an advantage in terms of money, but I think that in some ways, the current lineup is one that probably favors the Democrats a bit, particularly if the economy continues to inch forward. I think that there are certainly many wild cards, as we've seen in a single day. A political campaign can turn on a dime, and we're still in the preseason, so it's quite uncertain. I do think that the Republicans are likely to control the House, and they have a good shot at winning the Senate, and so we're likely to experience a divided government for the next 4 years.
Professor Donald Green from Columbia University. Pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.